السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما أما بعد فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. As always, I start in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I send peace and blessings upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Death is part of our journey in life. The word death has this sort of negative connotation surrounding it. In fact, I'm sure that when I said the word death, that many of you kind of piqued your interest because it has so many stereotypes and so many misconceptions surrounding the word. Because it symbolizes the end in our society. It symbolizes the end of our journey in this world. But in Islam, we have a different understanding of the concept because we view death as only the beginning. I'd like us all to take a step back and to look at this from a worldly perspective. Whenever we're traveling and we're away from home, we need a place to stay. So what do? We book a hotel room, right? And this hotel room provides a place for us to sleep, a place for us to eat and to feel secure, but it's not our home. We're not going to go out of our way to clean because there's room service. We're not going to go out of our way to turn all the lights off because we're not paying for the electric. We're not going to go out of our way to furnish it because we're only there for a couple of days. In fact, if you were to look at it from a mathematical standpoint, it makes even less sense because you're only staying there for 2 days out of your entire life. In fact, only a couple of years after staying there, you probably wouldn't even remember the details of the hotel room. You wouldn't remember what room number it was. You wouldn't remember the colors of the sheets or the carpet, how big the TV was. You wouldn't remember these small details. But this life is no different. We're checked in for what, 70, 80, maybe even 100 years? But what you do determines the outcome for all of eternity. And that percentage is far less than when you compare 2 days out of your life. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, كُلُّ نَفْسٍ ذَائِقَةُ الْمَوْتِ, that every soul shall taste death. Every soul. That means every animal, every human, every jinn, and even every angel. That every soul shall taste death. It doesn't matter if you're richer than Elon Musk. No amount of money can buy you time. Life isn't like the movies. You can't cheat death. Because while hiding in a bunker may protect you from a bomb, and while medicine can cure certain sicknesses, and while a vaccine may prevent you from certain illness, and a weapon may protect you from another, there is no way around death. No cheat code, nothing. We look over to our brothers and sisters in Gaza, trapped in the world's largest open-air prison. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. While bombs are being dropped on their heads, where 50% of them are less than the age of 18. The average age of a kid that dies in Gaza is 5 years old. That is far younger than many of us here today. And what did we do to deserve this life over them? And even when all of this is happening, with buildings being dropped on top of them, who do they turn to in the face of death? In the face of death, who do they call out to? My friend who has family in Gaza was telling me that every time his family gets access to the internet and they're asked about their status, and they're asked about how they're doing, they always have the same response. They say, Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakeel. That Allah is sufficient for us and He is the best disposer of our affairs. This is the same dua that Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam made before being thrown into the fire. When he faced death, he said those exact words. It is a dua that I encourage us all to memorize if we haven't, especially during times of calamity. But subhanAllah, in the face of death, their first instinct is to put all of their tawakkul on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And here we are, with shelter over our heads, water readily available, food filling our dining tables. Yet we're so ungrateful, so unaware. We go and march in protest for our brothers and sisters in Palestine with thousands of us attending. Yet our masajids are empty during the Fara'id Salah. We raise our hands asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to save them. Yet we don't pray our mandatory prayers. When will we wake up? We're telling the world, we're telling the nations, we're telling the West to wake up and see what's going on. But when will we wake up? Who's to tell you that your next minute is promised? A Palestinian man living in Gaza was interviewed by a Turkish news station. And he said something that we all need to reflect on. He says to the reporter, "Tell the Islamic countries not to perform funeral prayers for us. Do them for yourselves, for we are still alive and you are the ones who are dead." This is a man whose next second isn't promised. He could die at any second from a bomb on his head or a building collapsing over him, but he says that we are the ones that are dead. It doesn't make any sense, right? It's truly something that on the surface level makes no sense at all. But when you start to compare us to our Muslim brothers and sisters over there, we start to see. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, in Surah Al-Baqarah, He says that never say that those martyred in the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are dead. In fact, they are alive, but you do not perceive it. We look at the iman that these people exhibit, that they have such a strong level of iman, such tawakkul in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they are so much higher than any of us. They are the ones that are truly alive. Because while we have all the luxuries in the world, and we have so much to be thankful for, we aren't. And while they have nothing left in this world, they're thankful for what they have left. Because it isn't until we face calamity that we start to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We never remember to thank Him when we have everything to remember Him for. And when we face calamity, on top of that, we start to blame Him. We say, "Oh Allah, why are you putting me through this? Oh Allah, why me? Why am I the one facing these hardships? I pray my salah, I give my zakah. Why are you punishing me like this?" But we must remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at all times, through the good and the bad alike. And we have to have trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's plan, and inshallah He will make it easy for us. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. I want us all to ask ourselves a question. Since these series of attacks that took place on October the 7th, how have you changed? How have you grown as a person? What have you done? What effort have you put in to change, to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And if the answer is you haven't, then you failed. If you see what's happening to the people in Gaza over these past 7 weeks or so, and you've done nothing to grow as a Muslim, then you failed. Because you see what's happening in front of our very eyes, and you've done nothing to grow as a Muslim. You see this calamity, yet you still fail to grow closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because the truth is, we are all living on borrowed time. We don't know what time we have left. But you also can't say that you're too far gone to change, that you're too displaced from Islam, too detached from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You can't be living with the idea of that extreme. But you also can't live with the idea that you're going to change sometime soon. That, next month I'll stop going to the club. Next month I'll stop cursing. Next month I'll stop doing this and I'll start praying my salah. Because no one promised you that next month. We tend to forget that death is lurking around the corner, that not even your next breath is promised. We have to wake up and see what's being shown to us. And we have to turn back towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala before it's too late. Because you aren't promised any amount of time in this world. You aren't. And that's the simple truth. And I know it may sound dark, and it's not something that we like to be reminded about or to hear about, because death is such a scary thing. But what is the solution? How do we overcome this bump? How do we get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Because we all have to start somewhere. We all have to start taking small steps, as I mentioned. And I think that the easiest way to do that is through two small steps. The first step is detachment. What do I mean by detachment? I mean that you detach yourself from something negative, something that is harming you. It doesn't necessarily have to be something haram. It could also be something that is just negatively impacting you. It could be spending less time on your phone. It could be spending less time with someone who negatively impacts your character. Whether it's physical, whether it's mental or spiritual, detach yourself from something that is causing you harm. And what detachment allows is that it allows you to take that first step to getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether or not it feels like you are. Because the Prophet ﷺ said that Allah Almighty said, "O son of Adam, stand for me and I will walk to you. Walk to me and I will come running to you." And this hadith is saying that no matter what we do, we have to try. We have to make an effort. And the second step of this is attachment. And this step is slightly more difficult. It's attaching yourself to something beneficial, something useful. And this really depends on what level of iman you currently have. But you can't have attachment that is too far out of reach. You can't create a goal that is something you'll never be able to achieve in a short period of time. If you're not praying your 5 daily salah, you can't have your goal to be to memorize 3 hadith every day, because you're not doing the basics. But what this allows for you to do in the long run is it allows us to be more conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It allows us to increase our taqwa. And the rest of it comes along with it. Being grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, remembering Him through the times of good and bad. It all comes when you start taking these small steps. But the most important thing is to hold yourself accountable. You can't just have one goal for the next year that is a small achievable goal that you can achieve within a month. You have to keep setting new goals until you are able to become the best Muslim that you can be. Because as Muslims, we have to understand that death is only the beginning, only the start of the rest of our lives. Because our stay in this life is like our stay in the hotel room. It's only temporary. And our true homes are in Jannatul Firdaus. I also ask you all to make dua for our longtime Musalli who passed away this morning, Brother Ghafoor Qureshi. I ask you to keep him in our du'as. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to have mercy on his soul and to ease the souls of his family during this time and to grant them the highest level of Jannah. Ameen. And lastly, we must never forget the power of dua holds. Whether that's making dua for yourself, dua for your Muslim brothers and sisters, dua for the Muslims in the world, you must never forget to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to become closer to Him, to allow us to take these small steps to become better Muslims. As well as making dua for our Muslim brothers and sisters that are suffering around the world. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant sustenance to the people of Palestine. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect them. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect the Muslims who are suffering all around the world. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept those that have passed away as shaheed. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to become better Muslims and to strengthen our iman like the people of Palestine. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim fil alamin innaka hamidun majid. Allahumma barik ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم اهدنا فيمن هديت وعافنا فيمن عافيت، وتولنا فيمن توليت، وبارك لنا فيما أعطيت، وقنا واصرف عنا شر ما قضيت، فإنك سبحانك تقضي ولا يقضى عليك، وإنه لا يضل من واليت ولا يعز من عاديت، تباركت ربنا وتعاليت. عباد الله، إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي، يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. اذكروا الله يذكركم واشكروه يزدكم ولذكر الله أكبر والله يعلم ما تسمعون. وأقم الصلاة.